I first noticed how the boy carried the night like a backpack he could not set down. He clocked in at the diner when the sun slid behind the strip mall, sleeves rolled to the elbows, eyes still holding the last light of the day. He moved with a careful rhythm, polishing cutlery until it caught the neon glow, refilling coffee for truckers whose faces blended into the hour. The world outside kept spinning in soft indifference, but his steps measured a different time, the slow ticking of duty. I learned in pieces that his mother slept lightly at home, chest rising under the hush of medicine, and that the quiet inside their small apartment pressed on him like winter air. He never asked for an easier table or a lighter tray. If a shift stretched thin, he stretched with it. The boss kept the thermostat too low, sweaters piled on a hook by the office door, but the boy's hands stayed warm because they were always working. He lined up salt shakers, wiped down menus that smelled faintly of sugar, and listened to the night talk to itself through the clatter of plates and the distant hum of highway tires. Every hour turned like a wheel, and he walked inside that circle with a patience that felt older than 17. The regulars noticed the way he greeted them, not with the chirp of forced cheer, but with the gentleness of someone who knows that fatigue lives behind many eyes. He was polite without performing, steady without trying to prove anything. When tips were good, he slid a portion into a folded envelope he kept in his locker, marked only with a faint crease. When tips were bad, he adjusted the knot of his apron and took a breath that disappeared into the steam rising from the dish sink. There was a tremor of eagerness in him too, the kind that shows up when a person wants to do right and wonders if right will be enough. Sometimes on break he would stand by the back door, looking at the alley where the moon made a silver stain on wet pavement. That was when the weight of his age became visible, like a small tear in a strong fabric. He had the hunger of every teen who imagines weekends stretching wide, but his weekends folded into clean uniforms and lists of necessities. He spoke of his mother not as a burden but as a compass. The way he refilled coffee said he understood that care is measured in small ladles, that love can be stacked like plates and carried carefully through a swinging door. The night did not end because he wanted it to. It ended because he kept moving until the light returned, and then he walked home with the kind of purpose that does not make noise. Morning always arrived too early for him. By the time the sun seeped through the blinds of his small bedroom, he had barely closed his eyes. His body begged for sleep, but school demanded attendance. He walked the hallways with shoulders bent, eyelids heavy, as though each blink carried a stone. 2 teachers, he seemed distracted. 2 classmates, uninterested. Few cared to know the truth, that his silence was not arrogance but exhaustion stitched into every muscle. The cafeteria buzzed with laughter and easy chatter, but he ate quickly, pushing food down like it was fuel for a machine, rather than a meal for a boy. His friends had long since stopped inviting him to late-night outings or weekend games. They could not understand why he always said no, why he looked older than his years, why he rarely smiled. Some whispered that he was strange, others simply forgot to notice him at all. Isolation became a quiet shadow that followed him, one he carried without complaint but never without pain. There were moments when his body faltered. He would nod off during a lecture, pen slipping from his grasp, jolting awake with the shame of scattered eyes around him. Once, he failed an exam, the red ink burning on the paper like a cruel reminder that effort was not always enough. He wanted to succeed, not for himself alone, but because he dreamed of making his mother proud. Yet the hours spent at work stole time from textbooks, and the fatigue carved deep grooves into his will. Still, at home, he hid the cracks. When his mother asked how school was, he spoke softly of small victories, never of failures. She already carried enough weight with her illness, and he refused to add more. At night, while she rested, he folded her blankets tighter, filled her prescriptions, and made sure the fridge had what she needed. Then he would leave again for the diner, where the clock restarted its quiet, relentless rhythm. There were nights when despair whispered to him. He wondered if he was sacrificing his own future for a present that could not be fixed. He longed, just once, to lay down the responsibility and run like the other boys, free beneath stadium lights or in laughter-filled cars. Yet, when that thought surfaced, so did the memory of his mother's smile on the rare days her pain subsided. That smile, fragile and warm, was enough to pull him back into the grind, to remind him why he endured. The world measured success by grades and trophies, but his victories were invisible, measured in medicine bottles refilled on time, in rent envelopes paid, in the steady beat of a household that still held together. He bore the weight quietly, but each day pressed harder, and though he walked forward, the shadows of exhaustion grew long behind him. One evening, when the diner was nearly empty and the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, the boy sat slumped at the counter during a short break. His apron was creased, and his eyes were rimmed with fatigue, so deep it seemed to sink into his bones. That was when Frank, the older cook who had worked there for decades, slid into the booth across from him. Frank was a man of few words, his face weathered by years of long hours and quiet endurance. But he had been watching the boy, and he recognized something of himself in that weary determination. Frank didn't lecture, nor did he ask questions that demanded explanations. Instead, he told a simple story about how he once worked 2 jobs to care for his younger siblings after their father walked away. He spoke slowly, as if each word carried a weight he had carried before. The boy listened, his tired hands resting on the table, realizing for the first time that someone understood without needing the details. It wasn't advice that Frank offered so much as perspective. He reminded the boy that sacrifice, though heavy, was never wasted when it was rooted in love. He told him that strength isn't measured by how much you can carry alone, but by the courage it takes to keep walking even when the road feels endless. The boy didn't answer right away, but something in his chest softened. He realized he wasn't invisible. Someone saw the effort behind the silence, the grit behind the tired eyes. In the nights that followed, the boy began to notice small glimmers of light within his struggle. The exhaustion remained, but he carried it differently. He studied during breaks at the diner, determined to reclaim some control over his grades. He began to allow himself moments of stillness, sitting beside his mother and listening to her stories instead of rushing to prepare the next task. In those pauses, he discovered that love wasn't only in sacrifice but also in presence. When he returned to school, his steps were no less heavy, but he held his head a little higher. The whispers of classmates still echoed, yet they no longer cut as deep. He had begun to understand that the world's measure of success did not define him. What defined him was the love he carried in silence, the sacrifices no one saw, the strength to continue when quitting would have been easier. His journey did not erase the hardship, but it changed how he bore it. He began to see himself not as a boy trapped by responsibility, but as someone growing through it. In the stillness of those nights, between coffee refills and the clang of dishes, he found a quiet pride. He was no longer only surviving, he was becoming. In life, some of the greatest acts of love are never spoken out loud. They are carried in silence, in long hours, in sacrifices no one claps for. This boy's story reminds us that strength is not about shining in the spotlight, but about enduring the shadows for someone you love. His nights at the diner became more than survival. They became proof that even in hardship, love can transform weariness into meaning. If this story touched you, take a moment to like, share, and comment. And remember to subscribe for more heartfelt stories that speak to the quiet power within us all.